Ladies and gentlemen, Boker Tov. Always happy to be here with you. And I always am faced with a similar dilemma, which is you've been this way before in this, I believe you've heard this parsha before in Shoftim, Deuteronomy, you've heard about it. It's not news. So what can I teach you or what can I remind you of that maybe will be enlightening, maybe will be interesting?
4 weeks ago.
About
55 weeks ago.
About 55 weeks ago, and maybe some other times prior. But I'm going to start with just a general question. Are any of you familiar with the Gary Rosenthal piece of art that is hung in many Jewish lawyers' offices and many other places that is very beautiful, that says Tzedek Tirdof? Does that ring a bell? I guess you guys don't know enough lawyers or enough Jewish lawyers.
Famous concept.
We don't get into enough trouble that we need lawyers.
Oh. Well, I'm married to one, so.
We don't have one.
We don't have a lot, well, I have a living.
Gary Rosenthal piece, we don't have.
But it's a very famous piece. Trust me, you can look it up. It's beautiful, and it's Tzedek Tirdof, and that's kind of where we're going to begin today with a little sneak peek into of all offices. Zichrona Livracha, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She had that piece of art posted in her office in a very prominent place in the entry, and it was impossible for anyone to get to see her without them passing by that piece of art. And that piece of art was an opportunity for her to explain what she stood for. So we're going to look at that, not necessarily from the eyes of Rabbi Ginsburg, but through our own eyes and through eyes of Torah. Well, our teacher. In this particular case, we are all each other's teachers. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm sure you are, but just as a reminder, we're talking about today, the name of this class, so to speak, is Tzedek Tirdof. And if we are literal in English, we're saying justice, justice you shall pursue. And to start by being a troublemaker in my own mind and causing myself grief, I realize that we all, or most of us, and forgive me, I'm just generalizing for the sake of making it comprehensible, we have this tendency to think that we are the ones that should pursue justice in the sense of how we act, and that is 110% appropriate. But maybe thinking about this lawyer thing, maybe this thing in terms of Justice Ginsburg's office and many other Jewish attorneys, maybe even non-Jewish attorneys, maybe it was a message to people who are needing help that they have a right to seek out justice. So it can be a two-way kind of seeking what we do, how we act, and what we deserve, the respect that we're entitled to. I want to kick off with a couple vocabulary words just for the sake of clarity. So the name Shoftim, which is the name of the parsha, is translated as judges, right? So I want to talk about judges because a word in Hebrew that we would use as a judge today, anyone want to give me? Dayan.
Yes.
Okay, does that sound familiar?
Yep.
Related to the word like din, and like you have a Beit Din, which is today a religious court. Okay, that word is judge. The word shoftim also meant judges, and this is very, very full of discussion about judges, which to me is amazing. And what's most amazing that is a lot of it is so contemporary and applicable today. But I just want to clarify that when we talk about judges, one of the names that frequently comes up is Deborah, that she was a judge. She wasn't the Judge Judy kind of judge. Let's make that understand. That particular term for clarification means that judges were a term used for the leadership during the vacuum between Joshua and the first king of the monarchy, Saul. And that particular translation as a judge, in my view, if you ask Cheryl, is really a bad one, because a better one, at least in English, would be like a chieftain.
General.
A general, sort of the Wild West time leader
It was
kind of
more
thing.
military.
Right, someone who takes up to fills a void, and absolutely right, Ron, very much a military kind of leader. So that kind of, so that judge, there's several different kinds of judges, but that, since we talk about the period of the judges in our history, please understand that they didn't have a gavel or a courtroom. Those, at least Deborah didn't, pretty sure. So in terms of the tzedek word, we have to look at that as well. It's the word inside, Daled Kuf, okay? And it's related to what other, that word is what other words?
Tzedakah.
Tzedakah, you're translating as righteous is absolutely correct.
Hadik.
A tzaddik, right. Thank you. You filled in the blanks. And there are other ones, but those are clearly the ones that we absolutely think of the most. And of course, they're all related words. And we translate tzedakah. What's the common translation, please?
It's charity, but it's,
But it's not.
But it's not. Okay, thank you. That's exactly where we can say with great authenticity and being very correct that tzedakah also is justice. It might be in a different form.
the tzedakah, that when we say charity, the same thing in English, we always think money. But tzedakah is more than money, it's really gemilut chasadim. It's doing good deeds. That's also what Jews consider as tzedakah.
Okay, well, you're absolutely right. And if I can elaborate on your comments, we commonly translate that word tzedakah in English as charity. And charity comes from Latin, from the word caritas, which means basically love or affection. So the idea is that you are compelled out of your good heart to do this. And always, very frequently, it's in the form of cash. You're absolutely right. But
commanded to do it.
But exactly, but from a rabbinic tzedakah, from a rabbinic, that's the key point. That's the key point in this. From a rabbinic perspective, what we got going on here? From a rabbinic.
First day of school.
The first day of school, okay. So tzedakah probably represents a balance between the systemic kind of justice and individual actions. And if you look, and you can trust me, or you can look now in our Eitz Chaim, in terms of the notes, in terms of applied halacha or whatever they call it, it does talk about tzedakah being at two levels, which is the level of what we're able to receive because there's a system in place. It's justice. It's just, and then justice in the sense of how we act. So there's a systemic justice, and then there's an individual human kind of justice. So basically, supporting the poor in Judaism is not considered an act of kindness or generosity. It's considered an act of a mandated mitzvah. Yes.
I was gonna say the part about pursuing justice, isn't it just that we also have to go out and look for places where we can make justice occur? It's not that?
400%. Absolutely.
Oh,
And that's what I'm saying. Part of it is what we can receive but there's absolutely the part that it doesn't happen by itself. And there's also the part that some of us are not in positions to change things, but those of us who are absolutely have to seek justice in that particular way. So again, it's about fair procedures, and it's about fair actions, and it's not really about feeling the word tzedakah like this is a good place to give. There's nothing wrong with giving to places that you care about. Don't misunderstand. But it's in some cases thought there's a difference between the word charity and the word tzedakah. It's not a real good, accurate translation. So basically, we give tzedakah in Judaism for one reason, because it's right, because it's just, even if we don't want to. I happen to be a
Also
fan.
Told to.
Right, told to.
No, it's a commandment.
The commandment, yes.
We can take it all these levels. Yeah. I have a
Comment over there.
yes.
Aren't we also supposed to think of it as that person that we're giving to, it's theirs, it's rightly theirs. But from the idea that when we, it doesn't, our money doesn't belong to us anyhow. God has allowed us to accrue it, you know, through our God-given talents or hard work, whatever. And it talks about tithing, I think last week. And you give a certain portion of your income or what you've earned to the poor.
Okay.
And you're to consider it, it's what they are due that.
I want to step back to your initial thing, which is very key to this, which is fundamental Torah is that the money that we are distributing or the goods or whatever really are not ours to begin with. They are on loan from Hashem, and that's just, you're going a little bit more than detail than I had. Yes.
So I don't know if we get guidance in Torah, but I feel the challenge today so much is how do we do that? Or who do we give it to? How do we know it's?
I'm not in a position, I can quote you a very minimal Torah, and I want to move on, forgive me, because I have so much good stuff today that maybe you haven't heard. This discussion, I'll be happy to stay later, and it's super, super important. But my goal here today is to get you thinking about some other ideas besides these. In terms of how we give, in Judaism, charity does begin at home. The concept, which is idealistic and maybe not realistic, is that if every group took care of their immediate environs, then there would be no need, you know, for it. That maybe is not as applicable in today's world as it was before. Well, it definitely is not as applicable. But how we give it and to whom we give it and all of those things is a huge discussion, just kind of off the table right now in terms of what we want to, I would like to share with you today. I would like to go for a bit to looking a little bit at a Beit Din. A Beit Din, meaning today we would say a court. So essentially a religious court, forgive me. Essentially, in a little review, we know in temple times we had the Sanhedrin. Can anybody tell me how many judges sat on the Sanhedrin? 71. Don't forget that one. Okay, that's 71. And then when we were dispersed, the court system became portable, another evidence of our portability as Jews. And we had set up the Batei Din throughout. And how many judges were needed? 3. Very good. I knew it was a sharp group.
Well, it actually depended on what the case was.
It also depends on, you're probably right, and I don't know that. And if there's time, you can certainly
I think it
tell
was
me.
23 for murder.
I don't know.
There's always an odd number, that I know.
There is, let me just tell, okay, so I maybe was not clear. Today, we have a 3. Today, we have a 3. There was an intermediary, and as usual, Ron is right, which is basically, it was based on population. And a small town, or excuse me, a large town of Jewish presence was, in our numbers today, small, but in those numbers, if there were 200 Jews, the Beit Din would have 23 members. If there were 12 in the city or the town or the shtetl, the court would have as few as 3.
It's interesting that American court system in general, you know, the bigger courts, except for Supreme Court, have 1. In the other countries, there's always 3, I think.
It's interesting. I have to think about that in terms, I don't have a good comment for that.
I'm
You're
not
right.
sure that that's true in federal court.
In state
Here,
courts,
we have
too.
we have an attorney in the room.
Okay, Norm.
In the trial courts, we have a judge who usually works with the jury of 6 or 12. In the appellate courts, the panels are usually panels of 3. Sometimes the entire group of judges will
appellate,
sit
right.
in the appellate courts, but basically they're panels of 3, so it's not that dissimilar.
Okay. So as you.
Just have to have an odd number.
So as you know, the Beit Din was the judicial branch of the Kahal, of the community. And the community was basically self-governing in many places, as long as they paid taxes to the powers that be. That's what they wanted, let the Jews do their own thing, we don't care, kind of situation. And actually within communities, maybe it was common for Jews never to even think about going outside of the Jewish courts for anything. But in the modern era, we're basically talking about religious topics, not real estate topics or taxation topics or building topics or anything like that. But in today, we're talking about usually conversion or divorce, marriage, those kinds of things. And there was for a long time autonomy. And now if we're in Israel, as you know, there's really not autonomy, even though there are local courts, they're all controlled essentially by the Rabbanut. And so the court system has evolved in different ways for the good and for the bad. But I wanted to share with you something that I learned in a class that I took this year, and I just thought it was
There's also called Nidre.
There's also, pardon what?
Called Nidre
For vows.
Oh, they
for
were.
vows. It's a court. The Kol Nidre service is actually a convening of a court.
It's about a heavenly court, okay. I wanted to share with you something just in terms of a little bit of understanding, because when we talk about this in the theoretical, and I'm turning these pages and giving you these generalities, I'm doing the best I can, but it's once in a while we have to remember there were actual people in this. There were humans involved in this. And what shocks me is that those humans aren't all that different from today, even though they may have been 1,000 years ago. So I was privileged to take a class this past year with Dr. Rachel Hirsch in Israel through Drisha. And there was one case that I just shared to you because it's brief. And this is the case of a woman in captivity. I think maybe you understand why I was drawn to that case right now. And the year was 1241, and it was in Frankfurt, which is now Germany, then it wasn't. And I don't know what the term was, but the greater area was governed by the rabbinic court of Würzburg. That was the big city there. Würzburg, I'm sorry, I don't do the German very well. And at that court, there were other rabbis. We said there were multiples. But in 1241, the big name was a guy his name, and I had heard of it, I didn't know his real name, but Or Zarua. I don't know if that sounds at all familiar to you. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe. So there was an attack in Frankfurt, again, the year 2041, and this town had just over 200 people, and the attack wiped out, killed most of those 200 people. It took about 25 captives, and what they did, at least what was understood done, was the standard operating procedure, is that they were immediately forcibly baptized. We don't know what precipitated the event. There's some thought that maybe the Jews had tried to stop someone from converting, but whatever it was, among those 25 captives was one young woman who had been betrothed and had a forced conversion, a forced baptism. Now, what I mean by betrothed, for a little bit of review, is that in a traditional Jewish marriage ceremony, there are two steps: the kiddushin, which is basically the legal betrothal and the signing of the ketubah and the paying of the bride price, and then there is the niusin, which is the chuppah that we think about as the marriage thing. Way back then, they were very separated, as much as a year or even more apart. Some of these people didn't live next door to each other. There's multiple reasons for this. They may have never even actually met, been in other towns, whatever the story is. But she had been committed and betrothed in the kiddushin ceremony. And after 18 months, she escapes and she wants the marriage to go forward, but the man doesn't. So the question is, how will this forced conversion and the captivity affect her status? So what I have to tell you parenthetically now in terms of the Jewish legal system is the Mishnah assumes that any woman taken captive has been raped. In the ketubah, it said, I don't know if it does today, but at that time, the standard ketubah was, if you are, the man had signed, if you are taken captive, I will redeem you and take you back. Parenthetically, if you are betrothed to a Kohen, the marriage will not go on, but I will take you back you will be returned to your father. Yes.
But it says that, one should assume that if any woman has been taken captive, that automatically she has been raped. Do they refer it to a certain type of society? Is it Eastern Europe they're talking about? Is it Europe? Is it in general?
This is Mishnah. This is Mishnah. So Mishnah predates this Würzburg decision, you know, by 1,000 years. But that's a quote from Mishnah. So it was happening even way back then and it's happening
Okay.
today. Okay.
Could you repeat
But that is Mishnah specific. That was not, that was just, so you understand the text that is referred to and was referred to probably by the Orzarua. Yes. please.
Could you repeat, Cheryl, you know, what the ruling was?
I didn't get to the ruling yet.
No,
Okay, so the facts are basically, she escaped. She had been forcibly converted. She was committed through a betrothal to be married. The groom did not want her anymore. She did want to be married. And I stopped there with that story, took a parenthesis to tell you background wise that the Mishnah assumes that women have been raped if they've been held captive. So this is brought to the rabbi because what are we gonna do? I have to take her back. It's brought by the man. And he had signed in the ketubah, if you are taken captive, I will redeem you and take you back. The Orzarua sided with the groom. Okay, and he said the reason she saved herself was she must have offered herself for sex to save her life. That she wasn't really a forced captive, this is in his head, but that she must have been a zonah, you know, that the Hebrew word for that, a whore, rather than a captive, more than a captive, because that's how she stayed alive so long. Okay, I don't understand how this happened, given that there's no email and there was no telephones. And I don't know the time frame, but this was taken to the next level, probably after the damage had been done and she had been, and he went off and married someone else. I don't know what happened, but it was taken to the next level of a broader court. And all of the rabbis vehemently disagreed and sided with the bride. First of all, for the Mishnaic thing and the ruling. And second of all, because the rationale that was written in the footnotes was if she was forcibly converted rather than killed, chances are they had plans for her to be married to a Christian. And if they had plans for her to be married to a Christian, they wouldn't have raped her. They would have kept her pure for that. Now, this is maybe not what you expected. It's not as clean as, you know, a definite, but I thought it was a great insight into what was happening 1,000 years ago in a place far, far away that maybe explains a little bit more about when you hear about Beit Din, you'll have a little bit more image than just this 3 guys sitting, you know, at a table or something like that. So thank you for listening. And I don't have, you know, I don't claim any expertise on it. I can tell you that there are lots of cases like this documented. And it's really interesting. They made a point then to use sort of these generic names. The names were never revealed in the case studies. Everybody was a Yaakov. I don't know what every woman was. I think there were Rachel, but that was another just interesting part of this.
But that's exactly what's happening now. You can
Well,
make a case.
that's why it's.
That's what,
Mhm. Exactly.
see, there's one thing that they don't bring up in the newspaper, which is nice. But you know, you would think that they would already be talking about it.
So going back to justice and it being a big deal and mentioned in Torah. I know I sat here once, maybe a year and a half ago, and we were talking about a different parsha, but I brought up the fact, something about the Noahide laws. And we're not going to go over the Noahide laws, which are the ratios of all nations, meaning those who observe these 7 laws will have a place in the Olam Haba, the world to come. The 7th law is that you must establish a system of justice. So this goes back basically to Breshit. The whole concept of justice is huge. I want to talk for a sec, or maybe I think I have to because it's been mentioned a lot. Why are there, we know that Torah is pretty terse, that there are not a lot of extra words in it. And you often have to fill in the blanks about the words that are in there. What did they really mean? But this time they actually repeated a word. So, you know, tzedek, tzedek, tirdov. why, we also believe that every word holds meaning, so it's our job to read more into that or to explain or understand why there are two times the meaning of the words. So it's not just one of the simplest ways, and I think we already touched on it, is that it's tzedek tirdov, which is not just to establish it, but also to pursue it. Pursue it as someone needing it, and pursue it as someone to, make it happen and make it available and sustain that justice. Rashi says the duplication is calling our attention not only to the obligation of the judges to judge wisely, but for the people to seek out good judges. And if we have time, I'm going to share with you what that means because it's quite profound. Again, very contemporary, amazingly contemporary. A less sophisticated way of thinking of the tzedek tirdov is basically simply saying that the Torah is jumping up and down and saying, this is really important, pay attention. I kind of go with that one. And even though that's maybe not that profound, it does call your attention to it. You ask yourself why, maybe it's important, I got to think about it profoundly. Moving to contemporary today, I also wanted to share with you something else. And we all know what's happening outside. And this is not, again, I'll stay here till midnight if you wish, talking about these things. But for today, now I just wanted to make you aware of something, that the tzedek tirdov is more than something that is just in the parsha, more than something that are many pieces of artwork, more than something that's on a pieces of artwork, but it's also something that is contemporary in the Jewish social justice movement. Did you have a short comment?
No, you go ahead. I'll make it
Okay.
later.
I want to read you something. This is from Oberlin Students for Justice in Palestine. Oberlin College. Like many young Jews, we were raised among Israeli propaganda that was strategically placed in our schools, shuls, summer camps, families, and youth programs. If you are reading this and trying to grapple with or unlearn what you were taught about Israel, please hear us. Today, we ask you to understand that the state of Israel does not represent the Jewish people. Zionism is not an extension of Judaism. It is a racist ideology built on the displacement and destruction of indigenous peoples. Standing in community with Oberlin Students for a Free Palestine over the past month has shown us what it means to act decisively in the face of injustice. We will be holding our own anti-Zionist Shabbat gatherings. We invite you to join us. To the administration, this is not a time for neutrality. As one of those sides, we say, not in our name. To our fellow Jewish students, we say, tzedek tirdov. Justice, justice you must pursue. Do it in community, do it for each other, do it with love.
So where is the tzedek about the raping and the beheading?
Okay, I said, we're all aware of that. My point here is simply that this has been this is one example of literally thousands where the other side, particularly the Jewish population, is using that term.
If you have any way to respond to it, just tell them very simply that you are students, you're good students, you're Jews, maybe you're good Jews.
They were
You
brainwashed.
simply do not know
Right.
and do not understand.
I am
simple historic facts. That's
Yeah.
all there is to it.
right, but the facts don't matter, but I'm
They
getting
don't
caught up
either.
in my own warning, which is, we can all talk about this. And I don't want to say I'm happy to talk about this, but this conversation is important. It's just not, my point today, right now, was to just point out that this quote that we're sitting here from a totally different world perspective, reality, and we're right. I'm just gonna go on record and say that term is tossed a lot by justice being perverted, in my view, by people who are using quoting Torah also for their view. It probably happens in other things, but this is contemporary. This is right off the website. Jewish Voice for Peace, Student Justice for Palestine, Oberlin Jews for Palestine. It's not only Oberlin, forgive me, this is a national thing or an international thing. Tzedek tirdov to them. you know, it's upsetting to me. You can tell. I'm a little bit agitated. I know you guys are too. And that other discussion is 100% appropriate. It's just not our discussion right now. My goal was to expose you to how that term is used on the other side. Okay, quick, please.
Another reason I've heard that righteousness is repeated because it's emphasizing that the righteousness must be pursued through righteous means. It's not enough
Yes.
to have the goal of righteousness and then do things that are improper
To get to the end.
to get to the end. The end does not justify the means. And
I love that. I love that. Did you have something that you wanted to say?
No.
No, I thought, okay, sorry. Thank you for sharing that. So let's get to some specifics again in this court system and then by 10 o'clock, you're gonna be experts on this. So, well, you're gonna know a lot more than the average guy in the street. Okay, so it's certainly, one of the things about justice. Okay, I'm gonna go where it's sort of at the end, but have any of you ever heard of Portia? Any of you ever heard of Shylock? Shylock? Have any of you ever heard of Shakespeare? Okay, yeah, of course, okay. So we all are familiar with the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth like the gentle rain from heaven. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings, it's an attribute to God itself. When mercy seasons justice, it's a good thing. Therefore, Jew, though justice is thy plea, consider this, that the course of justice for none of us, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. Okay, translating that into contemporary English, which is basically, you are a sinner if you are only following the rules and you're just. Mercy is more important than justice. So this is written by Shakespeare. I'm gonna venture a guess that tens of millions or more people have heard. This is just one of many times that corroborates one of the many evil stereotypes about Jews, which is that we're by the book kind of unfeeling, we go by the laws. The laws come first. What I'm here to tell you now is that you can defend with pride the fact that situation absolutely matters in justice. And justice is nuanced in Judaism. One of the things that's not totally on topic right now, but when a Beit Din decides, is Judaism pro-abortion, pro-choice, whatever. Judaism is a case by case. It's not, and so that's the idea of you take it in the context of the facts of that situation. That's part of being just, is showing some mercy, showing some humanity, and understanding that the rule is not 100% black and white for every single person.
Can I throw
Yeah.
in something here?
Please throw.
You can go back to Hillel and Shammai, who always argued about everything. And most of the time, Hillel's position was upheld. And most of the time, Hillel's position was more lenient, more righteous, not more righteous, more merciful than Shammai.
Right. Absolutely.
There's one other thing that, if you go to a rabbi, in other words, there are laws, and if you go to the rabbi, he's following the law. I mean, you know, if you ask him, if you make an appearance, especially among the Orthodox, if you actually go to the rabbi and ask him, you will very possibly get a different answer. The famous
Beautiful.
case.
It's the
of-
humanity element, the nuance, the
Yeah.
situation. Yeah. The
The
feeling.
famous case of the chicken, where you bring the
I
chicken,
was thinking the same
you're
one.
per person, the rabbi will find a way that you can eat this chicken, which really isn't so kosher.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to Shemot. And it says this, in terms of talk about justice being nuanced in Judaism. And I'd love you to take home that concept, that justice is nuanced. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it to him by sunset, because his cloak is the only covering he has for his body. What else will he sleep in? When he cries out to me, meaning Hashem, I will hear, for I am compassionate. So what this says is if a person is poor, you may not go to sleep holding their what they gave you as a secure object for security. You have to return it by sundown so that they will be able to sleep in a garment. That's a very basic kind of thing, but it absolutely says, even though the judgment was, yes, you owe me something, but, and then ... we have to nuance it for the reality. So tzedakah doesn't only mean, as you, or tzedek, legal justice in the verse. So it's a situation when a poor person only has one thing, and you understand that the person to who he was owed money was obligated to make sure that he didn't sleep naked on a cold night. Yes.
Throughout the Torah, it makes the point that God is not just, does not just mete out justice without compassion. There's different forms of God.
And if we are B'Tselem Elohim, then it's our job as well. And that's, and there are definitely people who are secure going to a book. And as you shared, right, what do I do? What time do I light candles? Or, you know, something, whatever the deal is. It's the easy way, but it's not really the
only way.
I don't want to say the Jewish way, but it's not really the intended Jewish way, which is these things are in context. There is a context to all of these things. There's more. Isn't it always, everything with Jewish is not simple? It's not, there's always more to the story. That's you kind of depend upon. So I want to talk a little bit about judges, because the word judge, one of the things for years I've had like my key sentences up on my desk. And one of the ones I've had probably 20 or 30 years says, Dan l'chaf zchut. Judge on the side of, give them the benefit of the doubt. Give them the benefit of the doubt. That's to each one of us. That's a basic in Judaism. It's quoted very, very often. Dan l'chaf zchut. It's from the word dan, which means, like we said, din and dayan, to judge on the basis of merit, which in English we would say, be easy on them, give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to give you my eye-opening moment when I actually put that sentence that was, you know, on my desk, posted in my bulletin board in my head for real, which is, I lived in El Paso, Texas. Coincidentally, the guy on the left lived in El Paso, Texas for more than 40 years as well. And it was very frequent that we would run into someone from the Jewish community that we knew in the supermarket. Maybe it's here too, but it was just a common thing, particularly over the potatoes. So there were, and you'd have these conversations. You'd have, whatever. At any rate, you'd have these, you know, you'd have the brief visit, how are you? I'm sure that happens to all of you, you know. But there was one woman who just never said hi, never stopped. And it really bothered me. I just thought she was a snob, or I wasn't, she had something against me, or you have this tendency to think it's, you know, something about you, and you overreact. And this just went on and I just knew that there was no point even trying to get her attention because she'd march right on. Someone in conversation at some meeting said, and her name was Gloria. I don't think that's giving away too much right now. You know that she's legally blind, or because she's legally blind. I had no idea, because she wasn't wearing, there was no indicator to me that she was legally blind. And then I thought, this is a perfect example for me of what I've got posted in front of me. Dan l'chaf zchut. You know. I heard just yesterday a story about very able-bodied, very buff kind of guy using a, I'm sorry, what's the dog that you take on the plane with you?
Guide dog.
Not a guide dog, a service dog. And sitting, the service dog was a large dog, and taking the whole seat, and people around him were very upset with this. What in the world does he need a service dog for? And then at some point he had a conversation with someone, this was actually after the plane, saying that I was a pilot in Afghanistan. I had all of these things happen to me, and I've been terrified to fly. I'm PTSD about flight was very, very strong. And this is the only way I can get where I need to go for my work, you know? So that's another example of people not donning l'chaf zchut when they should have, you know? Okay, there are people who take advantage, but that guy was not not one of them. So I just wanted to remind you of that one, which is basically to judge others favorably, and this is for all of us in the room, including me. But talking about judges, listen to Rambam. Judges must be wise and understanding, learned in the law, and versed in many other branches of learning, such as medicine, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, and the ways of sorcerers. A judge may neither be a very aged man nor a eunuch or childless. Just as he must be free from all suspicion with respect to conduct and able to express his views in clear, well-chosen words, and must be conversant with most of the spoken languages. So there is no need for the services of an interpreter.
Sounds like he was.
Wow.
Sounds like he was campaigning to become a judge.
That is followed today like being childless. I mean, I'm talking about in Israel, I'm not talking about a Jewish judge.
Right, it's not followed.
Well, I don't think the American court system follows Rambam, but the standards are like amazing and maybe even unattainable. I particularly being a linguist type person, that's my original background, my original ID for almost 30 years. The idea of not needing an interpreter upsets me because my business would have, but at any rate, the idea of being conversant in many, many languages, the whole thing is really super idealistic, but I thought I would share it for you. But he goes on to say the fundamental qualities are wisdom, humility, fear of God, disdain of money. I guess disdain of greed, maybe, but not love of truth, love of people, and a good reputation. So, if we take it in today's context, we have a lot of judges, in Cheryl's opinion, who would be failing this test.
Including a couple of.
Right, including, yeah.
Yeah, really.
Then it gets harder because and when I looked at this is sort of to a level, diminishing this idea of context, but I guess you can go too far with giving context and giving mercy. And because he's saying a judge must not decide in favor of poor people because of pity and compassion for them.
Right. That's interesting. I find that interesting. I thought, along the lines of compassion.
Well, that would mean that poor people wouldn't have to follow any laws or be culpable for anything, right?
To take into account in certain ways, and I suppose courts do take into account some ways their need for.
Right.
Whether their act had something to do, but you could give.
But there's some judge on TV, a very kind, he's gotten a lot of YouTube stuff. I don't know if he's still on TV. The super kind, he's a real judge. And it's a woman, how much do you make he finds her, how much do you make a week? It was he said $5, you got to pay whatever. I think it was $70, $5 a month. As opposed to $70, you can't leave. There's that kind of compassionate. So maybe there's a way. Maybe there's a way, but
What's also interesting is that, in deciding the specific act of, did someone steal money? You still have to look at the act because the person, rich person has still worked very hard, you have to assume, for their money. And the poor person, you have.
I understand. You're saying there has to be some equal application of the law.
Exactly.
100%. I don't think I don't
No,
think Rambam was just.
You're not saying that, but you could go from what we're saying to thinking, and there are limits to, the Torah goes into explaining that the two people's money is valuable to both people. You say that you assume the rich person has so much, they're not gonna miss it. Or, they can give a little bit. That's not what you're supposed to be deciding. You know what I mean, but I thought it was interesting because if you're kind of liberal and you think, well, so favor the poor. But you can't do that.
Well,
Depending on what the
I'm gonna
situation is and how you do it, that's
okay,
your
I'm gonna
point.
close that part of this discussion, and all of these things are important. It's just because of time, Larry. One cannot pervert the law regardless of how admirable the purpose. So the law does matter. And we talked about a judge's character should not be it should be impeccable. I want to go on because I just want to share this with you. There's quite a bit more. Similarly, this is still Rambam. A judge must not allow his decision to be influenced by the past criminal record of the defendant. I mean, it's just so contemporary to me. The defendant must be judged for the crime for which he or she is now being tried. Only God may judge all the actions of people, both past and present. Okay? A judge may not listen to one litigant in the absence of the other. A judge must deliberate with care before finally pronouncing his verdict, but may not delay justice. Pretty sophisticated, pretty relevant. Is that fair? So that's about the judges. So now we got to go on to the witnesses. Let's see how many of us qualify. Okay, so how many of us here are women? So there you go. All right, so all right, you already know that one. But 10 types of witnesses were disqualified from testifying in court. Women who were thought to be too emotional to have a reasoned judgment, slaves, minors, the mentally retarded, these are their words, not mine, deaf mutes who could not hear questions nor speak in response to them, the blind who clearly could not be eyewitnesses, relatives of the parties involved in the case, those personally involved in the case, a shameless person, which whatever that means, and a wicked person, such as somebody is a compulsive gambler, or here's one for you that may not be applicable today, a wicked person or a pigeon racer. I don't know why, probably they bet on pigeons or something. I don't know what the,
Was it?
pigeon racers are not eligible to be
That's a
witnesses according to
Isn't it a gambler?
Yeah.
It must be related to
People
to
bet
something
on it.
like that. Okay, and then what is the acid test? 2 witnesses must give identical testimony. You are aware there was no jury.
Mhm.
The responsibility was on the witnesses who had to fulfill that list and who had to give additional
We also have
Testimony.
changed, I mean, a blind person can't be a witness. I think we have similar things with reading the Torah. But a blind person, I think we know today, hears very often, has better hearing. A hearing person, a non-hearing person very often can see, he has to use one of his other senses to compensate. So sometimes they are, and we're learning now about autistic people or Asperger or whatever the PC term is today, that some of them are awfully bright. They may not have social skills, but they're sharp as, and we see this on television all the time.
There is a rabbi who is ordained by the JTS, the conservative movement, whose name is Rabbi Lauren Tuckman. She is the only blind, she's the only blind rabbi that we know of ordained by any in current time. And she teaches on this, she speaks on this, she's fascinating. And she reads things as she brilliantly and with a different contemporary slant, and obviously from her being blind, but she supports what you said, plus much more, in application of those particular things. There's only one more thing. You've been very patient, forgive me, but I just want to talk to you about, I'm sorry, I had a place here and let me get to, okay, so one more point, subject death penalty in Torah. The Torah seems to support the death penalty, correct? You see more than once, you should be death by stoning. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for mouth. This is Devarim 19. Moreover, foot for mouth, did I say? Foot
Yeah.
for foot, foot for foot. Okay, regular,
That's all hoof and mouth.
okay. Okay, maybe it's almost time for me to stop. So, and then a lot of biblical offenses like breaking the Shabbat are punishable by death. Also murdering someone is also that. But in Shoftim, there's a more, like we said on everything else, it's a bit more than that. It's more nuanced, it's more complex.
Passionate.
Because we affirm the use of capital punishment, but it says, let the hands of the witnesses, remember we talked about them being the ones who convicted, let the hands of the witnesses whose testimony convicted the criminal to death throw the first stones. So that would force a witness to consider whether they're prepared to bear that responsibility of extinguishing a life. And then all the community's participation in throwing those stones basically says that all of us, all of Klal Yisrael shares the responsibility for that. So the blood would be on everyone's hands, and that would make us, we should not be numb to the effect, the reality of what capital punishment means. Yes.
One quick question. Do they say anything about all of those disqualification except for the woman? All of them are more or less understandable, the blind and the deaf and so on. Why woman?
Well,
Do they
at
say
that,
anything
okay,
about
women,
it?
this is Rambam's time.
Right.
And I'm quoting you specifically from his text. He says, women were too emotional to render
Too
a reasonable
emotional, that's right.
judgment. I'm not saying he's right. Maybe I disagree
That's
with
the
him.
way they were considered.
But that was the belief that was,
Hey, you come from such a
Too
country.
emotional.
What do you
You see,
still are that?
you see, it is all 102% our fault, because that 7th century ideology took it all from us. We are at fault.
this particular sentence is from Rambam, who's 13th century, but yes.
That's how they got it.
Again, we always have, people get very upset about things women in Torah. We have to take the context. In the reality, Judaism was, or the Hebrew religion, or the Israelites were on the scale of progressive, the most progressive, even though by today's standards, totally primitive. So the context is was very, very different.
Obviously.
So, basically, the bottom line is the rabbis effectively abolished capital punishment. It's on the books. It just hasn't happened apparently, and someone can prove me wrong, but I have read many, many times, including recently, there is no documented case of, that actually has been stoning to death for breaking the Shabbat or something like that. So it basically says and again, where did my head go to this in this? Did any of your heads go to anything contemporary with capital punishment? The Innocence Project, for example. So this rabbinic hesitation and the lack of implementation and these kind of ridiculous, impossible rules, the witnesses have to use the same words to convict, tell the same story. And so I'm going to close with this. So this is the Mishnah, a Sanhedrin. Now we're talking about back then, bigger, more judges. A Sanhedrin that executes once in 7 years is very destructive. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says in every 70 years. Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, if we were in a Sanhedrin, no man would ever have been executed. That would have been their particular things. It's Rambam's thought is it's better to acquit 1,000 people, 1,000 guilty people, than to put a single innocent soul to death. So maybe there's a couple takeaways for you, maybe a different way of looking at things. Thinking about the captive woman in Frankfurt, almost exactly 1,000 years ago, 1241, versus today. I hope that you take away something. I enjoy being with you always, and I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.
I just, you should go on.
Thank you.